For voting members.
And John.
Hello and welcome to the January 11th, 2023 meeting of the Thurston Regional Housing Council, our first meeting of the year. I'd like to start with welcome and introductions. And I think I'm just going to go through you on the screen. So the first I see is Thurston County. So Carolina, can you do the honors there?
Yeah. Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner. And with us today, we have Ramiro Chavez, our County Manager, Keely Marino. And am I missing anyone?
Tom Webster.
Oh, Tom Webb. You were right beside me, Tom. I don't know how I missed you. And
No
Tom
worries.
Webster. Okay. And I'm not seeing, oh, Elisa Sparkman. And that is all I'm seeing. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it looks like Olympia's next up. Danny?
Hi, everybody. Danny Madrone. I'm now the primary representative to the RHC from the city of Olympia. And joining me as in the alternate position is Clark Gilman. So welcome, Clark. Alternates can raise their hands and ask questions and participate as you see fit. So feel welcome to do so. I see interim assistant city manager Rich Hoy and director of housing and homelessness Darian Lightfoot from the city of Olympia.
Great. Well, welcome. Tumwater?
Thank you, Joan Cathy, City of Tumwater. And I'm it today. Michael Althauser is unable to attend the meeting today. And with me is Brad Medbird, our planning director.
Okay, thanks, Joan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Carolyn Cox, representing City of Lacey. And we have with us today Ryan Andrews, who is new to the tech team. He's our planning manager for the city. And we have acting city manager Rick Walk. And let's see if I'm missing anybody. Am I missing anybody, Brian?
Mayor Ryder looks like he's on the.
Oh, okay. And Andy Ryder is joining us by phone. So I guess he did catch a little free time. He had indicated he couldn't be with us today. So yay, he's here. And is there anybody else we need to welcome to the call that didn't get called on? I didn't see Yelm represented today. Okay. Well, has everybody had a chance to review the agenda and minutes from our December 14th meeting? Okay. Well, I'd like to have motions to approve both, please. Probably separate motions.
I move to approve the agenda for today.
I'll second.
Okay. Any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, agenda's approved. And could I have a motion to approve minutes from December 14th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Alrighty. Any comment on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Yay, got through that fast. Alrighty, our first item on the agenda today is a proposal for South Point, Lansdale Point apartment project. And we have presentation here today from Darian and Maverick Ryan. Darian?
Thank you. Yes, Kelly, can Kelsey and Bo both be promoted, please?
Of course.
Thank you. right. Well, as I travel over, they will be presenting on this Lansdale Point project. And then at the end, they'll have a more formal ask from the RHC. So they're all here to answer questions and I'm here to support them. So Bo, Maverick, Kelsey, take it away.
Thank you, Darren. Let's see here. I'm going to get my, is it all right if I share my PowerPoint presentation on the screen here?
Please do.
Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Darian. I'm Bo Baker. I'm a development manager for Southport Financial Services. To start a little bit with kind of how we've got here, we've been meeting with local leaders for the last year or so, kind of discussing options to make this project viable, which eventually led us to meeting with a few of your members, including Commissioner Mejia, who took our proposal to the Board of County Commissioners in November. Our takeaway from that meeting was that anything related to housing needs to go through the RHC, and the Board of County Commissioners wanted the RHC to be the one to submit a proposal for funding this project. So let's switch slides here. Okay, so a little bit about us. We were founded in 1995 and are based in Tacoma. We specialize in affordable housing development, utilizing the state's low-income housing tax credits to fund these communities. We have successfully secured funding and developed over 40 affordable properties in the state, and have also acquired 14 additional communities from other developers without affecting the existing affordability restrictions that are already in place. Our principals, prior to founding Southport, also had their first affordable development in Thurston in 1986. That property, which is called Crown Point Apartments, and is 160 units, is still affordable and is still under our management. We actually just refinanced it last month to recapitalize and ensure the long-term viability of the property. So we aren't going anywhere, and neither are our affordability restrictions. A little bit about Lansdale Point. There will be 162 units, which is quite a bit of scale for an affordable community in this state, if you're not familiar with the others. And it will be 100% affordable at 60% or less area median income. The site will feature 3-story apartments, a community center, a business center with free Wi-Fi, a playground, and a sports court. The location for the site provides easy and walkable access to groceries, restaurants, freeways, and shopping, along with being on a major bus line. The property is being designed with more stringent energy efficiency standards, in that there will be electric vehicle parking and solar installations to offset energy costs. The property is also being designed with families in mind, which is an underserved population in the rental market. So there will be a mix of 2, 3, and 4-bedroom apartments offered. Based on a market study that we had performed, this property would account for roughly 6.2% of the estimated market need of rent-burdened families in the area. The affordability requirements, which are deed restricted to the property, are preserved for 40 years, even if the property is sold or transferred. And lastly, and this is also based on that same market study, we estimate that families living at Lansdale Point will save roughly $838 a month on average, rather than being in the traditional rental market. Moving on to the way that this is financed, we will be utilizing the Washington State Housing Finance Commission's 4% low-income housing tax credits. This is competed for annually and has a scoring criteria that must be met in order to win these awards. The criteria that brings us here today is the public leverage requirement, which requires 5% of the total development cost to be funded by a local public entity, which we project the total cost to be about $53 million. So our ask to you guys is this: we need $2.65 million to make the project become a reality. And by doing so, the state would then match your funding roughly 8-to-1, which is a pretty killer return on your investment, instead of it going somewhere else. So in terms of, a few different ways that we can make this happen, the first idea that kind of brought us here was to utilize ARPA funds. So, the RHC could submit a request to the Board of County Commissioners for a reallocation from another source to be instead utilized for housing, or it could just be a direct allocation from the county or city or any other, public entity The funds could be derived from bonding against future income, such as through your 1406 or your home or your 2060 dollars. And then if there's any other sources that you guys can think of, which, you know, we're totally open and happy to brainstorming this with you. So our application to the state for the, you know, the WISHVIC funding is due March 29th. So what we would need from you prior to then is a letter of commitment for funding. It doesn't have to actually be the money itself, it just has to be a commitment. And then we just, you know, we need to show that the funding would be available by the end of the year to actually be placed into the property. If that runs over, it's okay. It just needs to be, you know, a realistic time frame. Yeah, so I kind of blew through that pretty quick. I know it was a lot of information. So thanks again for having us here today. I wanted to open it up to you guys in case you have any comments or questions or any ideas of really how we can make Lansdale Point a reality.
Both.
Thank you. Both. Do you mind unsharing your screen?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So questions of Bo? Okay.
I see Tom's hand up as well as Ramiro's.
Okay, sorry, they're not showing at the top of my screen here. Okay, Tom, then Ramiro.
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick question. Do you have a sense of time frame? 162 is a lot of units, which is great. If all goes well and you receive the 4% tax credit, what's your kind of broad outline for construction and when these would be ready for occupancy?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, Washington State Housing Finance Commission announces awards around June. Then, you know, say that this is already in place prior to then. We would ideally close, you know, September-ish, which means that the first building would be placing in service sometime around June of next year, with final completion about middle-ish of 25.
Okay. Would you need the full 2.6 mil, all of it by December?
No, but it needs to be committed and it would need to be fundable prior to completion of the project. So if we're thinking middle of 25, then it would need to be, you know, payable by then.
Okay. Well, I'm just thinking if we could spread that out a little bit over time, it wouldn't. I'm
Mhm.
worried how this is going to affect some of the other projects we have in line. And well, I think I certainly am excited about the prospects of this project. You know, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
Well, so
Alright.
the good news about this as well is that most of the other, you know, I think actually all of the other affordable housing developments that have gone into the Thurston County area are utilizing 9% housing tax credits.
Mhm.
So they're competing in a different program. So we're not actually competing against each other for really anything other than this public leverage requirement.
Right, right. I understand. What I'm talking about is, you know, competing with for $1406 home fund dollars. And that.
Mhm.
Okay, so Ramiro and then Carolina.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to go back to the possible funding avenues to explore. And I think you was recommending that perhaps the RHC should send a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. I just want to bring a little bit of concern in the latitude that perhaps the Regional Housing Council has or doesn't. The Regional Housing Council really doesn't have the ability to ask the county to reallocate ARPA funds. That is probably something that is not part of the purview. Nor the RHC has the ability to request the county to make a direct allocation from general fund to this project. That is not part of the purview of the Regional Housing Council either. I think the conversation on this will be whether within the context and the funding available, the Regional Housing Council manages whether this project rises to the point of your recommended uses the current funding the Regional Housing Council is managing. But a recommendation to for the Regional Housing Council for appropriation from other county funds is not appropriate. Just want to make sure and clarify that.
Okay. Thank you, Ramiro, Carolina, and then Darian.
Darian's hand was up before me, so no
All
worries.
right,
Darian.
Darian and then Carolina.
Thank you. To lay the foundation for some funding discussion, the City of Olympia is prepared to offer half of the request from a loan. So 1.3, the City of Olympia is prepared to contribute in the form of a committed loan to the project. So that can help propel a potential discussion on how to make the full 2.6 package available to Southport to move forward for the tax credit. So we're really now looking to discuss about half of the funding request.
Wonderful. And then Carolina, and then Clark.
Thank you. Thank you, Darian. I was actually going to highlight that, but also ask whether the RHC could loan the other half of the funding. Is that something that Southport would be interested in? Or is that an option?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some requirements when it comes to the money being in the form of a loan, which, happy to go through them all with you. I believe off the top of my head, they need to be at a minimum 20-year term is off the top of my head. Again, I'll confirm that number. It would need to be at a below market interest rate. Typically what you'll see, like with the housing trust fund, because those are, structured as loans, it's like 1%, somewhere around there. And then it needs to be deferrable. So in the event that these properties don't have available cash flow to make the interest payments on an annual on an annual basis, that money is deferred and accrues at whatever interest rate is set. So I'll confirm all of that, and I'd probably be best if you and Darian and us and me kind of jump on a call to kind of go over it together. But yeah, happy to structure it that way.
Okay, Clark, and then Andy.
Thanks. Bo, well, first, I live right around the corner from Crown Point and actually had a disabled family member living in there. So I'm
cool.
Glad for that complex and familiar with it. Your first slide said based in Tacoma, but I'm understanding that you're part of the Florida-based major player in this, both building low-income housing and rehabs of low-income. Could you talk a little bit about the broader portfolio? Because I think you have a pretty big track record in the sport.
Yeah. So our founding principal, he opened up shop here in Tacoma in 1995. And then around 2000, he basically went and opened up another office in Florida. And so they do the same bread and butter low income housing tax credit developments down in the Southeast as well. And so, yeah, we're, I think across the board, we have developed somewhere between 16 and 20,000 units. Yeah, so that's spread out through a few different offices, but yeah, our footprint is pretty big at this point.
Okay. Andy?
Yes, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So first I'd like to say this is a great project and it's an exciting project. But I also want to caution the Regional Housing Council on how we're going to address other great projects that can come up during the year when we set a normal course of action for funding. And then something like this, like really great project comes up and you're like, hey, by the way, we need to move money around so we can make this great project work. Right? And so if we're going to set a precedent today on moving dollars around for a great project that comes up, I don't know how we don't do this again in the future when another great project comes up. So I think we need to be a little cautious here if we're setting the wrong type of precedent. Even though I'm supportive of the project, I want the project to go forward. I hope we can find a way to make it happen. But you know, here we are, not even through our first year of, you know, going through a normal course of a normal process, and we're already trying to find a new way to fund something at the last minute on a new request. And I have some concern there of we're setting the wrong type of precedent.
Okay. Can you lower your hand, Andy?
Yep, I'm gonna try to do that.
Okay. Back to Ramiro and then Darian.
I think Darian was first.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, to address your point, Mayor Ryder, we talked about that in the tech team, and it really sparked some good discussion because we feel similarly. We want our process to be equitable and to honor the projects that have put in some really great legwork to filter into our application process and to feed into the RFP and receive the dedicated funding that we've set aside for projects like this. I think that, we did acknowledge that this is the first year of our process, and we haven't had the ability for Southport to come forward and ask for funding in a clear way before. They, have went to other governing bodies trying to figure out how to click into the RHC because it hasn't been clear. But the tech team is working really hard to establish those clear processes moving forward. And I think that the discussion that has been sparked is that we will direct people to our RFPs that are outlined in the spring and summer, and that because it hasn't been established and because there is this tight timeline in March, we don't want to allow the process that we haven't had established in the past prohibit a project like this from moving forward. So it felt like we're all on the same page that moving forward, we will direct projects to our RFP and really honor our system and process. But this is a bit of a unique scenario because we haven't had something established in the past.
Okay, thanks, Darian. Ramiro, and then Carolina.
Yeah, I appreciate Darian's perspective, but I also echo Mayor Ryder's concerns in terms of we really need to be, the Regional Housing Council needs to be equitable. And even we don't have a process at this point. And maybe other good projects and the request for proposals, the RFP that we're going to be issuing this year is going to give us that perspective, because the more that we take in resources for those great projects, I'm not necessarily this is not a good project, it's a great project. We're going to be able to do less when we get a good project through the request for proposals that we're going to go through this project. And I believe the whole Regional Housing Council has agreed from the beginning to move ahead with the RFP to determine what will be the best project that you can fund. So I echo Mayor Ryder's, and I think this is not about the value of this project. This is a great project, but I think it's more about the process and making sure that we don't jump into something that perhaps we not come back.
Thank you, Ramiro. Carolina?
I'm kind of along with Darian. We took forever to come up with a process. It took so many months to even just have a consensus. And so I know that Southport has reached out and been doing legwork for the months and months that we've been talking about this process, because they were trying to fit into the regular RFP process. But it's taken so long for us to even get to a consensus of, and for us to even get to an ILA, that kind of this is where we are at now. And that's why the Board of County Commissioners, when we heard from Southport, we recommended for them to come through the RHC because we thought it would be the best approach. But it's taken, you know, I think realistically, the delays that have happened, it's been a long time. And I'm glad that the process is going to be set and we're going to be moving forward in that way. I did have questions about the pipeline and how that it would affect the pipeline. And staff answered those questions for me. So for me, I think it's a great project. I would want to look at avenues where, you know, funding could be available if it's either by loaning or just different other methods. But I don't want to lose an opportunity because we took forever to establish a process. And now we're saying, oh, you have to wait, you know, another couple of months after we set this process. It's bureaucratic. And while I understand that there's a question about equity, I feel like they've been trying to make the rounds, trying to find other funding available. They've obviously talked with the City of Olympia and they've managed to secure half of the funding from them. So I think it's a conversation worth having.
Okay. How much time has the tech team had to work with this and consider it?
Southport reached out to Jacinda, who has known about the projects for several months. We've seen the document that Kelsey presented to the chamber about a month or so ago. So we've had several discussions about the project.
Okay. Danny, you have your hand up?
Yes. Well, first, I appreciate the questions around the process. I'm a very process-oriented person myself, and those were some of the first questions that popped into my mind in terms of making sure that we as a body remain trusted among the community, especially others who are looking at these funds for potential projects. But I also see the side that Carolina just expressed in terms of just how long it took for this to come into place. And also something that we haven't really dug into at all is the fact that, until today, is the possibility of a loan and being able to get these funds back to reinvest later. I think that is an incredible opportunity, and it hasn't something that has been discussed as part of our as part of that process yet. I also was impressed. To see both the Olympia Food Co-op and Power submitting letters of support to me demonstrates a really strong level of urgency around projects like this. And I have two questions, and I guess one is for the tech team and one is for Bo. But Carolina, you mentioned that you had questions around impacts to the pipeline, and I'd be curious to hear what staff have to say about that. And Bo, my question for you after that is, if the answer is, oh, well, we have a process in place, and so we need to honor that. What happens if you have to wait until the RFP is there? How does that impact your project to be delayed by that amount of time?
Yeah, so what would happen is if we still submit for funding in March, assuming this is not available by then, that we lose quite a bit of our compatibility in a program which is typically often 2 to 3 times oversubscribed of funding available to projects that are submitted. Most likely it probably would not be allocated. I can't say that for sure just because it changes every year. but that's just likely what would happen. In that event, we would, still, work with you guys and try to, put this into place for another application submittal next year. But in the event that it wasn't funded next year either, this project would likely just lose its viability, which is based on the qualified census tracts that are designated by HUD every year. So this project was in one, but it actually just expired here at the beginning of the year. And so whenever you're in an expiring qualified census tract, you basically grandfathered in for 2 years. So that means that you have either this year or next year in order to close with your tax credits.
Thanks. And I don't know who from the tech team can speak to like pipeline and impacts.
I can speak to that. And thanks for that question. So the immediate impacts, so we have actually 2 RFPs coming up for affordable housing. As part of our February RFP, the traditional one that we do issue with the Federal Home Investment Partnership Funds, as well as our local 2060 funds that will be coming out at the end of February that we're working on. That will go forward, and those projects that are in the pipeline are identified for that funding. That project will go forward, and that's not the funding we're talking about potentially allocating to this project. So those pipeline projects will still have the available funding in the current RFP that will be issued at the end of February. As we've talked about, we're looking at issuing a second RFP probably in the May-June timeframe for the local home funds as well as the 1406 funds. So we can have the advisory board set up to issue that RFP. So what would most likely happen is we would need to reduce the amount of funding in that second RFP in May, June with either the local home fund or the 1406 funds for that RFP that would go out. So those funds have not been spoken for. We anticipate that RFP would have, approximately 3.8 million of local home fund, another, 1.3 million of Olympia's home fund, and then 900,000 of 1406 funds. So all told, that's, close to $6 million. So a commitment from this body of those funds would reduce the amount available in that, spring, summer RFP by the 1.3 or so million dollars that would be available to issue. So it would not have an impact on the projects that are identified in the pipeline, but there would be less funding available that we put out with the combined home fund dollars and 1406 dollars in the May-June timeframe. If those are the sources of funds that, with all the ifs and conditions, that are appropriate.
Alrighty. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions from the crowd? Joan.
Thank you. Of course, this is like others here, new to me. I didn't know all this was going on, but I just have a question. Could we continue our pipeline and support this project as a loan? And so we could do both. I mean, I think there's room in our region to have both things happen.
Yes, yeah, as Tom just outlined, the pipeline projects would not be impacted because those are the ones that are applying to the RFP in February. And this would solely be a reduction of the larger home fund RFP that's coming out in the summer. When we anticipated that would be a $6 million competitive process, we could set aside of that $6 million to fully fund, set aside the 1.3 to fill the gap, and RFP the 4.5 instead. So it would not immediately impact the projects in the pipeline, just reduce the total dollar amount for the home fund RFP that was going out in the summer.
So it does affect the pipeline?
No.
By reducing, is that correct?
So
reducing funds available in the pipeline, this project impacts the reduction of them in the June, July, or April, May, or whenever that was time frame. It would reduce the availability for those pipeline
So-
projects. Is that correct?
So there are 2 projects that were pre-identified for funding in this funding year that are in the
Yeah.
pipeline. So it would not impact those 2 projects, the funding that those 2
Right.
projects would receive. We're hoping to get new projects with the local home fund dollars. We're hoping to attract additional developers and funds. And so it would reduce the amount going to new projects to be identified, but it would not impact the funding for the 2 projects that are identified in the pipeline.
So the projects that it would impact are not future pipeline projects. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. They
They're-
have not been identified yet. They're projects that have not yet been identified.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, Danny?
Yeah, in terms of this upcoming RFP, is it a potential scenario that if this body were to recommend to the county to do this loan so that this project can move forward, could they then apply through that RFP for it to not be a loan, and then compete through that process in that way?
Yes, I believe that's a possibility. Yes, if follow the direction of this body in terms of how you'd want to structure that and give them that opportunity.
God, I wish Michael was here.
Okay.
No.
Any other questions? Andy?
I just, again, I'm having a hard time with this, with this one. Again, I think it's a great project. I want it to get funded. I understand we've been a little slow. The RHC is new. We're still trying to get the home funds, the ILA. We're trying to get things, figured out. I just don't know how we pick this project before we allow anyone else to go forward first. Right? And that's what we're doing. We're saying this project, we're going to take money off the top before we start the RFP projects for the June. And that, I know you've had the discussion at the step, that doesn't sit well for me. As much as I like this project, and I do, I want this project to get funded, I just don't know how in June we said, oh, we're putting out an RFP. It's not going to be as much as it was normally going to be because we've already picked a project a couple months ago, right? I don't know how we justify that going forward. I don't know how we justify that in June. I certainly can't support it, even though I support this project. I can't support where we're at right now and how we're going to fund it.
Darian?
Yes, and I'm hearing the concern. I think that, as Carolina had mentioned, I would ask that we really reflect on allowing bureaucracy and potential tough conversations to prohibit an substantial return on investment of $2.6 million to the 162 units of low-income housing that we desperately need in our community. So this is a process that we will have to share, that this project, because of timing, because we didn't have something in place, because we haven't had a local funding source like this in the past, we are agreeing as a body to move it forward in the form of a loan, not as a grant, which we don't do loans in any other of our funding stream, any other of our funding sources. It is in a loan in order to not allow this project to fail to support our community. And that's the discussion and how we're phrasing it in the technical team and the language that we're using.
Okay, thanks, Darian. Danny, and then I think we have to move on here since we're getting behind.
Yeah. I actually wouldn't have raised my hand at all if I had heard Darian speak first. But for me, what makes the difference here is that it is a loan. It does reduce what we can give in this first RFP. but it also comes back to us and we get to reinvest it. And that's not something that we've discussed at all in any of our conversations around how the process should come forward. So that for me, like opens the door for this conversation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to propose that we delay a decision on this until our second January meeting. Let the tech team have a huddle between now and then. You all are going to meet between meetings, right? And come back to a proposal. I think everybody needs a little time to think this through because I think it's brand new to some of us. And I think we also have heard several people talk about process and, things being brought to us and then needing quick deadline decisions, and how we can make this a little bit more orderly process. We need to be thinking about that a little bit more too. I will say, I want to do everything we can to make this project a reality. It's desperately needed. And how often does a project this size and with the track record that Southport has of longevity with this, I think it would be a real plus for the community. So I'd like to do everything we can to make it happen. I just think if we don't have to make a fast decision today, we shouldn't. I think we need a little bit more reflection time for staff to analyze it and to come back with a recommendation at our second January meeting.
If I can just add
Sure.
on to that too, does that give enough time also to bring back information, what the terms of a loan would look like and what that scenario that I think it was somebody had mentioned that can set up that meeting?
Yeah, I can work with Southport and we can get some loan specifics and have them back at the next meeting.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Alrighty. Well, is anybody uncomfortable with that path? I'm open to other suggestions, but
I think as long as we have enough time, then let's take that time because I'm hearing Joan say that that I heard you say I wish Michael was here. I don't know if you thought you were muted when you said that, but I would want everyone to feel comfortable making the decision. And if we've got a couple of weeks, then let's take a couple of weeks.
alrighty. So thumbs up, everybody, to delay to the end of January. All right, cool. Well, Bo and company, thank you so much for coming today and giving us a presentation, and we look forward to further engagement.
Thank you guys so much.
You bet.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn, I have to, I'll be joining via my phone. So I'm hopping off and I'll jump on in a second.
All right, thanks for the heads up. Okay, next up, timely transition here is the funding priorities and with Tom and Keely.
Yeah, so I'll kick this off and I'll turn this over to Keely momentarily. So we are setting up no decisions tonight on funding. What we wanted to do is present to you where we are at around setting funding priorities and what we know about funding at this point. What will be coming back to you at the second meeting in January is looking for your official approval on funding and moving forward with our February RFP. So we're really presenting, this is our first present, in some cases, our second presentation of some of this information. Give you a chance to ask questions if we need to tweak anything so that we're all ready to go with a vote and approving of funding priorities and criteria and all of that for the RFP at your next meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keely to talk about the recommendations on priorities we have for homeless services.
Great, thank you. Pardon me. So as the guidance from the state or requirements from the state for each of our communities, we must have a local, under the Commerce's Community of Care, as we are a member of the Balance of State Continuum of Care, that we must have a local continuum of care, that one of the responsibilities of that local continuum of care is to make funding recommendations on an annual basis or as needed. And so I did meet, that's the Homeless Housing Hub, and I did meet with the Homeless Housing Hub to get their recommendations, and I will, it's in your packet, but I will share with you. All right, so the Homeless Housing Hub number one priority, which is often the priority, is to maintain the system as it is at a minimum. So to continue to support programs already in operation in the homeless crisis response system. That includes all of our shelters, coordinated entry set aside, outreach, basic needs, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, diversion activities, cold and hazardous weather set asides, and the housing and essential needs. So this is, again, the 2163. It's the Consolidated Homeless Grant, CHG, Housing and Essential Needs, and the 1277 funds. So that is their first and highest priority, as you can imagine. And especially so this year, as the one-time infusion of COVID funds have been exhausted. And Tom will update you on where we stand in terms of revenue projections, which are looking a little desperate with regards to document recording fees. So that is their number one priority. And then also the Homeless Housing Hub taking very seriously the commitment to center people with lived experience and expertise, as well as addressing racial disparity, which is one of our 5 main outcomes that we're working towards in our homeless crisis response plan, and is one that the state has required us to address. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion and lived experience folks being involved in the homeless crisis response system, we're hoping to incentivize providers to take those activities on. Talking with one provider, they mentioned that what is frustrating is they may have a line item in their budget that is for training per se, let's say, and around diversion, equity, and inclusion. And their entire ask is $50,000. But if they have a $3,000 set aside for that training, well, if they're only awarded 20,000 or 25, that doesn't scale. And so the first thing to go is that training. And that's true, I think, for almost everyone who is trying to do the good work, but has to prioritize services and operations. So we're suggesting, they suggested incentivizing through setting aside some funds that if agencies would like to make sure that they have a budget that's protected for addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or to provide compensation for those with lived expertise if they're participating in any kind of advisory capacity, that will be something that agencies can identify within their budget for their in their applications for that set aside, which Tom will go into more detail here in a moment. And finally, not necessarily a funding priority, but they really want, if there's any way that the RFP itself, the questions or the ways that it is packaged and sent out to really enhance bridging activities. The reason why they brought this up is with the Anchor Community Initiative and the Built for Zero initiative, there's such a heavy focus on bringing broad stakeholders to the table to do case consulting, to build policies together, and to develop by name lists. They want that to continue and to strengthen those efforts. So although it's not necessarily a funding recommendation, just the spirit of the RFP focusing on that type of activity underlying our system as a whole. So those are the priorities that they have brought before us. And I'm happy to take any questions, and I will.
Any questions for Keely? Oh, come on, not a single question? Wow.
Well,
she's
I
a-
can jump into the funding, and then there may be some questions once we talk through funding. And so I will share my screen as well. And hopefully you can see. So this is in your meeting packet. And so the funding situation this year, as Keely alluded to, is not looking stellar. And so what we're looking at right now for our RFP here in February is around the affordable housing resources that we talked a little bit about, the pipeline. So we anticipate receiving about the same in the Home Investment Partnership Program. That's the federal resources. The Congress passed that budget at the same level. So we're expecting to have around $750,000 that we can issue for RFP. Our 2060 local document recording fee, last year we issued about $450,000. This year we're projecting we'll be able to award $250,000. So pretty substantial cut. So that's looking at a total award of around $1 million. And that is the funding that will be used to fund the projects that are in the pipeline, the current pipeline, the projects that are currently identified. So that's what that funding is for. For homeless services, we have right now hoping to receive for CHG funding. Our baseline funding from the state was around $800,000 a year. Last year we got a bump, so previously that went up to just over $1 million, but our baseline funding was actually $800,000. Housing and essential needs, we're also hoping that stays steady. The budget, the governor is projecting an increase in that, but we'll see if that increase materializes. For the 2163 local document recording fee, in 2022, we awarded $2.8 million in document recording fees, or in funds. This year, we're projecting we're only going to have about $1.5 million in document recording fees. There's been a substantial decrease in those document recording fees. The local home fund is also a source that we can use to help fill some of that gap. So from the county's home fund, which we're projecting to be about $4.5 million that we'll collect in 2023. We can utilize up to 30% for services. 60% will go to affordable housing capital projects, 10% will support administration, but 30% can be used for services. So we're recommending to allocate that 30%, which would be about $1.35 million, to help fill that gap and the reduction in document recording fees. And then the 1277 document recording fees, if we receive the baseline level from the state again, that would be around $4 million. We have heard the state, of course, is also seeing a reduction in document recording fees. So both CHG and 1277 are document recording fee based funds that come to the county. We were projecting a flat line because we'd heard that in the state budget, the state is working to fill that gap to ensure that there is not a reduction in those document recording fees, or they find an alternative source to fill that gap. However, we received an email today from our county Association of Human and Housing Service Agencies that right now it's looking that the state will not be able to completely fill that gap from reduced document recording fees. So I think there's a real risk that we'll receive less than $800,000 in the CHG and less than $4 million in 1277. So they're asking cities and counties to advocate with legislators to try to fill that gap. So passing that message along. So in total, if this kind of maybe a best case scenario right now, we would have 11.45 to issue in awards. Last year we awarded 11.6 million. So still a slight reduction from last year if the state is able to fulfill the full gap we expect to see from document recording fees, and that is far from certain. And of course, with inflation, of course, those dollars are not going to go as far as they did a couple of years ago. And then we have our Human Services Fund, which is the 0.1% that the local jurisdictions contribute. Last year we had 291,000, projecting around the same, around 300,000 of those local sales tax dollars. So that is what we're anticipating to put out in the RFP this year. As the budget progresses, we'll continue to update this. Hopefully we'll have a little more information at your January meeting on those revenue projections from the state. They've indicated that they'll try to provide that information to us. So with that, I wanted to also talk about that June RFP that we were just talking about. So what that looks like for a June RFP for the affordable housing capital dollars is we have our 1406 sales tax retention funds. So around $900,000 to award for that. The Olympia Home Fund contribution would be around $1.3 million. The county home fund contribution, the 60% of the county's 4.5 million projection is $3.8 million. And then there's the Home ARPA Fund Award. So the county, as you know, receives $3 million in home ARPA funds. We need to submit a plan by the end of March. So up to probably a maximum of 2.8 million could be issued as part of this RFP for capital projects if we want to use this funds to develop affordable housing. Some of that could also be used for services. So I think there'll be a discussion coming up as part of that plan. It will not be incorporated into this year's RFP, but we'll be looking at that home ARPA. So that's not a firm number but a potential. So potentially up to a little over $8 million that could go out in a June RFP for capital dollars, based on especially what happens with the home ARPA funds, and then based on any decisions you make around the Southport proposal. With that, and then finally want to talk through some of the set aside. So in the past, we've set aside the funds that we've received, mostly the local document recording fees, the 2163s, that we know there's things that we want to fund, that we need to fund. One of those is coordinated entry. So we know we need to fund our coordinated entry system. We still accept proposals for these, but we set aside those funds. So for the last several years, we've set aside $250,000. In 2022, we were able to give an extra $100,000 out of HEN funding, but going forward, we're recommending to continue the original baseline of $250,000 for coordinated entry. You've also set aside $200,000 for housing basic needs. So really homeless prevention is how I think of these dollars. So continuing that set aside that's been done in the past. For cold and hazardous weather, previously we'd set aside $250,000. Last year, you set aside $400,000 in hopes that we would have a single adult cold weather shelter provider. That did not materialize. And based on conversations, we don't expect that to materialize again this year. So going back to the $250,000 set aside for cold and hazardous weather sheltering. The point in time count that we do every year, setting aside $25,000 for that. The $200,000 of emergency funds. This is the pot of money that you use to fund the OLIMAP safe burning is not the right term, but the reduction of burning in camps. So that's the pot of money that you just used for that fund. So for unanticipated needs, the homeless coordinator, in past years, we funded the homeless coordinator at the county position out of 2163 document recording fees. We're recommending not doing that and proposing to pay for that cost for that staff out of the home fund admin. So there are some savings there. We're looking to continue. The lived experience steering committee is getting up and running, and we're very excited about it, but it needs to continue. The consultants contract, we can extend through the end of August, but then the funding for that comes out. So we'll be looking to have a new provider take on support for that lived experience steering committee, facilitating the meetings and facilitating the management and issuance of stipends for those committee members. So we think a $50,000 per year budget to allow for an agency to take up that task is a cost we're looking for. Advisory board stipends. This is something that we talked about last meeting, and we know that has not been finalized. But what is being proposed is on the table for Olympia to take on covering the costs for those stipends for advisory board members, for those who want it. And the proposal is, rather than shifting those monies back and forth, is have Olympia kind of reduce the amount that they take out of their home fund that gets transferred to the county. So up to $25,000, likely to be much less than that for stipends. So that is one proposal. And then finally, based on what Keely just talked about, set aside some funds for those DEI line items in budgets. So recommending we set aside up to $60,000 to allocate $5,000 per agency for up to 12 agencies to fund specific DEI related activities. So as Keely said, if someone requests $50,000, they only get $35,000-$40,000 in their ask, we could award $5,000 to a specific line item specific for DEI activities. So so that comes up to a total of just over $1 million in set aside funds for those activities. And so let me stop there and see if there's any questions.
Questions for Tom? Danny?
Yeah, my question, when I look at the emergency funds and I know how quickly we spent them the first time, and I think we've already spent over half of them, early in the period of time, and it makes me wonder, like, what we might be anticipating, especially knowing that the project with OLIMAP and ORCA it's being piloted this year, but do we want to think about setting aside some funds should that project be successful, so they're not coming in for emergency funds? That's just a thought to stimulate some, thoughts from others or conversation around like what we might anticipate so that we can, try not to spend all our emergency funds like as soon as the year starts,
Yeah, and I guess to jump in, I would recommend in that sense that for this RFP going forward, that proposal would submit an application, because that emergency funding goes through August. This funding will pick up in September. So if it's a project that you want to continue to support, that they would go through this normal RFP process to go through the competitive process to determine how much you're able to award to that project. So the pilot project, it was kind of urgent, came up in the middle of the year, but I would anticipate that they should now move into the regular funding process, and that they would be in line with competing with all the other applications for that funding.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on funding sources? What's available?
And once again, we'll bring these final, hopefully final numbers. There's always a little uncertainty with the state numbers, but we go out in RFP. This is our best estimate. And then by the time we're actually issuing those awards, we should have those numbers nailed down of what's available.
Okay.
And then I will share my screen again if I can keep talking. So in addition to funding, one of the things we wanted to share with you was the scoring criteria for how we score applications. And so we're not recommending any changes for how we scored applications last year. So this is the same criteria, looking at importance to the community, project design, cost effectiveness, partnerships and collaborations, support of vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations, financial capacity, responsive applications. And then for the capital projects, we also look at staff capacity and timeliness. And then for the homeless services, we have some administrative scores we look at. Is a project low barrier housing first? Is it an existing service getting at that priority that the HHH is looking to support? And then past compliance. So just want to share, those are the scoring criteria. We're not proposing any changes in the scoring criteria from what we had last year.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Nope, that's it.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing how that picture looks in a few weeks. Well, let's move on to the RHC Advisory Board update from Keely and Darian.
Great. So the Regional Housing Council Advisory Board process, the applications went live on the 3rd of January. They have been circulated through the Housing Action Team listserv, the Greater Regional Outreach Workers League, and I'm going to call on my colleagues to help remind me all the ways that the information has gotten out. It's gone to the Lived Experience Steering Committee, and it's also City of Olympia drafted a press release, which they sent out into the world, and the county followed suit and posted it on our social media and on our website. It's also on our website. Where else have we sent it out? Did I get them all? Okay, great. We've got about 9 applications for the Homeless Services Advisory Board at this time, about 7 for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board at this time. We are going to send another round of outreach. We've got some plans for sending out the applications and announcement to the Thurston Thrives and to the Chamber, as well as pushing the press release again, so that we can generate some more applicants, we hope. We have also worked on the scoring criteria, and that has been, I think, finalized, as we also finalize onboarding materials, et cetera. So I think we're in good shape for our advisory board process. One thing it's really important to note, we are letting, we let people know that there will be an expectation that there will be, for those that we recommend moving forward, interviews on February 8th and 9th, which will require us to push back our Regional Housing Council second Wednesday meeting to the 3rd Wednesday, which I believe is February 15th, in order to stay on target for our timing. And I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. And Darian, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, just want to make a quick plug for support from all of you to help get the biggest reach we can, especially in South County. Really hoping this can be as diverse and representative as possible. So if you have any listservs, or if you're on boards of other organizations, or have more specific outreach and direct communication that we can do, we would really love y'all's help so we can make the application pool really diverse and a good representation of the county. Thank you.
Yeah, I would ask that if the municipalities who have had citizen committees working on this know of some who have been good ones, good members, encourage them to apply if they still have an interest in working on this. So beating the bushes to try to get 2 really, really good boards stood up.
I will say that for the Affordable Housing Board, right now it's about 80% of the applicants are from Olympia, and 1 from Lacey and 1 from unincorporated. And it's a little bit more spread out in the homeless services, but not by much. So the majority of applicants identifying working or living in Olympia.
Okay, so Lacey is listening. Is Tumwater listening too? Thurston County, yeah. Okay, thank you for that. All right, we ready to move on to the ILA amendment?
Yep.
Tom? Okay.
Great. So I will share my screen again. So based on our meeting from December, we went over the proposed amendments to the RHC ILA, incorporating the advisory boards and whatnot. And that language seemed to be supported. So we haven't made too many changes. 2 suggestions that came from Councilmember Cooper was, 1, adding some language to allow a non-lead agency jurisdiction play a role. That we were specifically thinking of Olympia with the stipends and issuing stipends. He wanted some language in the ILA that would allow Olympia to carry out that role on behalf of the RHC. So we added some language that I'm sharing here, that the lead agency can transfer program or administrative funds to a partner jurisdiction to implement or administer specific RHC approved tasks or programs. So we've added that language. And then at the very end of the document, we've added just a tracking for when each amendment was approved. So those are the only 2 changes that have been added. Otherwise, we haven't made any amendments. We haven't heard any other concerns from jurisdictions about the proposed language. So I think if everyone is in agreement, we're ready to move forward. One of the things that did get raised last meeting by Mayor Ryder was the question around the 1406 funds and whether that was something we wanted to also look at in the ILA and make an adjustment to that. So I don't know if your jurisdictions are ready to have that discussion today. I think there is some urgency to move forward the ILA to get approval from the councils with the Olympia and county ILA. There's a 90-day requirement. So the ILA needs to be updated within 90 days for the home fund component. So if the 1406 discussion is going to take a little longer, I think we want to move forward with these amendments and then perhaps do a second round with the 1406. But if the 1406, if everyone's in agreement and we can move forward quickly, great, we'll make that happen. So that's, I think, the edits we have in place. My sense is, but be curious if there's any objections or concerns with what's in place. But otherwise, I think the outstanding question is whether folks want to have a discussion around 1406 changes to the ILA.
Okay, what's the pleasure of our group here? Are you happy on the 1406, Andy?
No, I've been thinking about this obviously since our last meeting, and I just want to bring up something that I'm not sure if the other jurisdictions are quite as aware as we are in Lacey, which is how we fund our staff for for these services, right? In Olympia, you're able to fund some of your staff out of the home fund. And that's been a great opportunity for you to have a direct funding source for that. And the county, they've been able to obviously fund some positions off of a percentage of all the dollars that come through the county. But then it comes to Lacey and, and Tumwater, and we're asked to put forward staff. And yet we don't have the same opportunities for a funding, ongoing funding like the other jurisdictions do. And it does sort of treat us a little bit differently in Lacey and Tumwater, where we don't have a funding source for our people, but Olympia and the county has a funding source for theirs. So I'm not sure what we do about that or how we address it, but it is something that it's become apparent, and it's something that in Lacey, where of course we would love to have more staff, and we actually are putting in, we're going to have some more staff next year, but we're taking it all out of our general fund. So I just want to bring that up as a concern. I'm not sure what to do about it.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, and just a little bit more context from Olympia's side. We have 1.5 employees that are funded through the home fund, which will actually transition over a period of time with the ILA. But we do have 3 that are funded out of the general fund. So we do put in that regard too. I know all our resources are different as a city. I just want to say that in terms, just to bring that context from our jurisdiction.
All righty. Thanks, Danny. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, how would you like to proceed, Tom?
I guess, are we ready to move this ILA kind of as with the track changes to jurisdictions to take action in February, to take a vote on the, it can go through a final legal review. I believe most legal counsels have seen at least a draft of the amendments, but go through a final legal review and prepare for council actions in February on this RHC ILA. Is there any objection to moving forward, or any other steps that need to happen before we move this forward?
Sounds like Rick is saying Lacey's ready. How do Olympia and Tumwater and Thurston County feel? Okay, Olympia says yes. And we have Carolina?
Yes, for the county?
Yeah. Are you comfortable taking that to the commissioners to get their blessings?
Yes.
Okay. Then it looks like we got a plan, Tom.
So that doesn't include the $1,406 though. Is that correct?
Correct. Does not include any changes to how $1,406 are managed.
Right. That's a separate.
So currently each city council needs to take an action, approve any projects funded with 1406.
We currently have it scheduled for our January 26th work session to brief the council, and we can bring up the $1,406 at that point and see where they are. And then with the idea that we'd have it queued up for action in February.
I mean, I do think that RHC should be in charge of the $1,406. I mean, it doesn't make any sense in my mind for us to be working all together on all the other pots of money out there, but treat $1,406 separately, and so I'm not sure when we're going to have this discussion at RHC, but I think we need to sooner than later, so we can all get on the same page and all be working together with as many pots of dollars as we can, so we have one place where we can coordinate and make sure they're being used to, in a really good manner, which we're trying to set up here at RHC. So maybe we're a little early on it, but I hope we can move in that direction sooner than later.
Thank you. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Can you just say again, like what the barriers are to just doing that now?
Just having all the jurisdictions agree. I
Oh.
mean, last year we worked, I know there was, so my understanding of the background is because 1406 local jurisdictions took action to approve the retention of the sales tax, that at that time last year, local jurisdictions wanted to retain having some say over how those $1406 were spent. And so there was time spent that city councils wanted to have a say in 1406 since they took action to approve the retention of those sales tax dollars. So
Well,
if
I'm
that's
willing to
changed,
take this, I'm willing to take this back to my people. Sounds like Lacey's already doing the same. You know, Tumwater and the county can weigh in.
Carolina or Joan, anything to say about that?
Yeah, I'm willing to have a conversation with the commission about this.
Okay. Joan, how do you feel?
Ours can definitely go back to a work session and talk about, unless Brad has some other input he'd like to make about this, but I think that we need to go back and talk about it. I'll be happy to.
It's appropriate to schedule a work session to go through that.
Okay. Well, I have to agree with Andy's comment that I think it only makes sense if we have a regional council that the 1406 ought to come within that purview as well. But obviously each of us has other seatmates who need to be persuaded of that. All right, Clark and then Romero.
Great. I just wanted to ask a clarification as the new guy. I see language in the ILA about sort of phasing in this 1406 relationship, but the Affordable Housing Advisory Board says that the board will have responsibility for the 1406 recommendations. So I don't know whether that requires an edit or if that's my misunderstanding.
so I think the intent is that the advisory board would make a recommendation on 1406, but before that recommendation could go to the Board of County Commissioners for final approval at RHC, that they would also need to go back to the city councils for approval, and then it would go to the Board of County Commissioners. So it's one extra step in that approval process, but it would still originate from the advisory boards.
Thank you, Tom.
Romero.
I'd just like to add on the historical perspective that Tom provided. That was the initial approach the county took. Perhaps we need to consolidate, but at that time, local jurisdiction wanted to retain that. So as Commissioner Mejia stated, she left. We'll bring this matter, but I believe that was the initial intent from the county anyways, just to consolidate all the funds into a single decision point.
All righty. Thank you, Romero. We got, okay, I don't see any other hands up. Oh, Andy, was yours raised and then lowered? Okay,
I'm good. I'm good.
all right, good.
Okay, I've
All
got a
right.
quick question, Carolyn. If we were all to have a deadline for like going back to our people and coming back to the RHC with some clear feedback on how to move forward on that, like what would that deadline be?
I'll look to Tom on that.
I think it would be that first meeting in February. I would say February 15th. And then I think we could quickly make the adjustments to the ILA, but then boards will need to take actions, or city councils will need to take action no later than March on an RHC ILA.
I'm glad you mentioned February 15th. It took me a second to check my calendar when that was mentioned, and I was just going to bring it up and go to the order. But moving that Wednesday meeting is not going to work for either myself or Clark in terms of other commitments related to city council. So we won't be able to have a voting member at the RHC on the 15th. Unless we can move other things around, which I don't know how possible that is.
It's always something. The way our busy schedules are. But that means that we'd have to have every other jurisdiction there in order to have a quorum if Olympia can't be there. And, you know, if Danny, if you have strong feelings on the topic or recommendation for the topic, we could certainly take if you want to send something ahead of time for the group to consider, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, I guess, you know, because we all are so busy, it feels weird to have meetings moved around like that without being able to like have a say in it. I'll just say that just for the record, just because we're all so busy, like, you know, to not be able to have a vote at the at a meeting, and to know that a meeting can move around without us being able to say anything about it. I don't know. I'm just sitting with that for a second.
And just to provide context, that meeting moved so we could accommodate interviews. So we weren't going to move it, but we had to fold in the interviews for that additional week. So just want to.
Those are interviews for the 2 advisory committees, which are taking out your chair and co-chair. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't like it either, because it's really hard with an already full calendar to start juggling things. But
Yeah, and I'm not upset. I'm just expressing a discomfort. That's all.
yep, I think we're all feeling a little pinch on there. Romero,
Yeah, could I offer an alternate process, perhaps? Yeah, the group, the RHC is going to be meeting in 2 weeks. Maybe the technical team can provide recommendations on the language related to the $1406. We'll bring that in 2 weeks. We look at the proposals and we take the whole package to the respective councils. And they will review everything all at once. Because I think a 2-step process is going to take a long time, and I'm concerned that we're going to be meeting that deadline that we have in the agreement with the City of Olympia of 90 days to amend this agreement. I guess that's my concern. Maybe just have, you know, staff come up with a proposed language related to, because I sense that is the objective. Just bring the language. Perhaps the RHC will review in 2 weeks, and we'll take the whole package to the respective councils and commissions.
okay. Do I hear anybody speaking for or against that?
And I think that makes a lot of sense, as long as we can get in front of our councils between now and the next 2 weeks. We're just gonna have to fit into our agenda, so we're gonna have to work with staff to make sure you know we get in the work session or however we do it. But I'm willing to try to squeeze it in Lacey and accommodate that. It does make sense to do it all at once instead of talk about the agreement and come back, oh, immediately we need to update the agreement. So yeah, it makes more sense to do it all at once.
Okay.
And I think we can get those proposed edits out to you very quickly. I think it's basically going to be deleting 3 or 4 paragraphs. So I don't think there's many other changes. It's kind of removing some language.
Okay.
So it should be pretty easy to do.
Joan and Carolina, are you all comfortable with that? Joan seems to be nodding yes. And
Commissioner Mejia left, but I can speak on her behalf that yes, the county is okay with that process.
okay, great. All righty. Well, I know we've exceeded our time here, so I think we ought to wrap things up. If we could save good of the order till next time, unless somebody has a really time-sensitive burning issue. Anybody? Okay. Well, I would like to conclude the meeting with welcoming Ryan Andrews to the tech team and having him be an active participant in this. I've worked with Ryan for many years. He's been the guiding light of our Lacey Planning Commission and does stellar work. So I think you'll enjoy him as much as I do. And if we could all turn on our mics and give a round of applause to our departing Kelly Adams. Kelly's not leaving.
Yay,
city,
Kelly!
but-
Yay, Kelly!
Kelly.
Yay, Kelly. Thank you so much. You've been a rock and a rock star. We really appreciate it. And I appreciate Ryan stepping up to fulfill Kelly's role as well as the technical role. So anyway, thank you all. And unless there's anything else, we'll call this adjourned. Okay, thanks everybody. Good meeting, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Some of you sooner than that. Bye.